Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochran in Ottawa, but all eyes are on Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the Republican National Convention. A convention that you can see right here that is taking place under extraordinary circumstances because just 2 days after an assassin's bullet tore through his ear, Donald Trump is now the official Republican candidate for president. And we know his pick for vice president is Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. We'll bring you live to Milwaukee in just a moment. But we're also watching Washington, where Joe Biden sits down for yet another high-stakes interview. This one was initially booked to reassure Democrats that Biden was still fit to run for president. But now he also has to reassure the country after the attempted assassination of his political rival. But first, the CBC's Paul Hunter is at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, and he joins us now live. So, Paul, we saw J.D. Vance there right off the top. Donald Trump has picked J.D. Vance as his running mate. What does Vance bring to the ticket?
Yeah, he's just below me as we speak, David, looking down at him as they're kind of officially nominating him at this moment. He brings a lot to the ticket. I think objectively you could say it'd be hard to come up with a better choice for Donald Trump right now. Many calling J.D. Vance at this point the heir apparent in MAGA land. Certainly if Trump wins back the presidency, it's hard to find anybody more suited at this point. He's young, he's smart, he's well known. Hillbilly Elegy, of course, the book that turned into a film, brought him fame in this country. But effectively, it's because of the nature of that book, growing up in the Rust Belt in Ohio, that speaks to voters in three of the handful of critical battleground states. Ohio, let's say, obviously Pennsylvania as well, Wisconsin, where we are here. Again, it's hard to find a negative about J.D. Vance today. The difficulty is if you go back in time, the tremendous loyalist that J.D. Vance is for Trump right now was not the J.D. Vance of 2016. The last time there was a convention in a place like this, setting aside the process in 2020. At that time, he was a never-Trumper. It was not said on camera, but he was quoted as calling him America's Hitler, for example. Later, he turned that around 2022 when he ran for the Senate, and he said that was a mistake. Clearly, Trump believed him, and he sees all the positives that so many others see in J.D. Vance as far as the MAGA side of things goes. And here he is, as we speak, David, being nominated for Trump's vice presidency.
Paul, it just shows you how quickly and significantly things can change in American politics, right? And this convention is proof of that because it's just days after this attempted assassination of Donald Trump. So what's it like there at the RNC in Milwaukee?
Honestly, David, it's festive. I expected coming here. I got here yesterday. I thought it was going to be, everybody walking around with a fearful look on their face, and it's celebratory. I think part of that is because many see what happened in Pennsylvania as given how Trump came through it, as wind in their sails at this point. Because for many people, that terrible event proved to them that Trump can survive. Trump can be strong. Trump can live up to his brand as the guy to bring America back, and that nothing will stop him. To go down the path that many see him, that he is the chosen one. I've been talking to some of the delegates. We were down on the floor earlier and asking some of them how they feel about things given what happened on Saturday. I went up to Randy Fine, who was one of the delegates here from Florida, and I asked him open-endedly, what do you make of what happened on Saturday in Pennsylvania? Here's some of what he said.
Well, I think it's the natural culmination of 10 years of demonizing this guy by Democrats. You can't say put a bullseye on his head, he's Hitler, he'll end America. What do you expect would happen? I think it means President Trump's going to win and has to win. Look, they've tried to silence him, bankrupt him, jail him, and now kill him.
Biden is calling for unity. Is that possible? Is it an achievable? Should it be achieved? Can it be achieved at this point?
He can take his unity and shove it up his ass.
Wow.
And that kind of echoes a lot of what we've heard here, David. Yeah, I know. Pretty blunt. We've heard Joe Biden call for unity. We've heard others. And in fairness, we've heard Republicans echo some of that. But by and large, the feeling I heard from people here was echoed by Randy Fine in that clip.
The phrase, I have to ask you how you see the attempted assassination, which is a phrase I didn't think we would be uttering when we were speaking today. But Paul, how do you see this assassination attempt on the former president affecting the rest of the convention and then kind of beyond?
You know, it's hard to see how it doesn't change everything. You know, I don't even know if we're past the point where we can say, okay, the shock has worn off, and now we can look at things, because it still feels so stunning. I say that people echo the views of Randy Fine because they are enraged by it. There's all the conspiracy theories that it was, inspired by Democrats or pushed by some of the language on that side. I think, in fairness, there's been a lot of language on all sides around this. It's hard to say how this plays out, other than the fact that it is a gift to Donald Trump and the Republicans. The feeling I get here is that nothing can stop Donald Trump now. Randy Fine said so in that clip, but you hear that from a lot of people. There is a sort of extreme confidence at this point that, if nothing else, and the expectation is we'll see Donald Trump this evening, that he'll walk out presumably with the gauze on his ear, and that will only increase the motivation for MAGA voters. I've said this many times the last couple of days. The whole question right now is who's going to be motivated to get out in November. This was the question before Saturday, and it's the question now. It's always the question, who's going to get people out? Biden's problem was that Democrats weren't as motivated because of the age thing, right? Because of the Middle East questions and things like that. MAGA people have always been more motivated. This puts their motivation on steroids. People here, everybody, say it's hard to see now how Trump can't win.
Paul, it's amazing when you look back at the footage of the incident. He was looking over his right shoulder. Had he been staring straight ahead, it's a totally different outcome. The extra is amazing. Just, yeah, not even, that.
Can you imagine?
It's the back of the skull as opposed to the top of the ear, and what a different place America is today, had that been the case. So, Paul, thank you so much. That's the CBC's Paul Hunter in Milwaukee. Thanks, Paul. Well, just last hour, Donald Trump was officially named the Republican nominee for president. This only 48 hours after that assassination attempt.
On behalf of our entire family, and on behalf of the 125 delegates in the unbelievable state of Florida, we hereby nominate every single one of them for the greatest president that's ever lived, and that's Donald J. Trump.
Let's make it official. Accordingly, the chair announces that President Donald J. Trump, having received a majority of the votes entitled to be cast at the convention, has been selected as the Republican Party nominee for President of the United States.
Also there in Milwaukee is Canada's ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman. Ambassador, it's good to see you again. Thank you for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're obviously dealing with a very different set of circumstances and a very different political environment than when we booked this interview days ago, since the assassination attempt on former President Trump. What is your sense of what has been happening in America since Saturday?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of things, as you say. It's quite a changed environment. I mean, first and foremost, I think the country is in a bit of shock. It was a horrific event. It has caused a lot of people to feel very sad, very devastated by that this kind of violence could happen in that kind of an environment. But also, I think on the good side, we've seen political leadership from the president, President Biden, to former President Trump, and a lot of their senior advisors and representatives come together and say, okay, the United States needs to turn down the rhetoric. We need to calm things. We need unity, and I think that's a good thing, and it bodes well.
Do you think Americans will listen, at least the partisan Americans? Because at the extremes, the polarization is so intense. And even in the aftermath of this, there was accusations of a false flag staged incident by some people on the left, allegations that the Democrats were behind it by people on the right. I mean, do you think Americans listening to the calm down message?
Look, I hope so. I think that what's important is that the leaders, those leaders of those parties, the political leadership, continues to maintain this message and then continues to act accordingly by toning down the rhetoric and by demonstrating a commitment to all Americans' safety and security. I think you're always going to have people on the fringes. I think there's always people who unfortunately want to traffic in conspiracies. But the vast majority of people, I think, actually just want to engage in public discussion and be able to express themselves with respect to their political views, some of which are strongly held. But I think, the vast majority of Americans, if not almost all Americans, abhor this kind of violence.
Earlier today, Donald Trump gave his supporters something new to talk about. He announced his pick for vice president. It's Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, who's going to be his running mate. Known for the book he wrote, Hillbilly Elegy, also is close friends with conservative member of parliament, Jamil Javani. What do you make of this pick now that we have a sense of what the competing tickets will be, presuming something doesn't change on the Democrat side?
Right. Well, first of all, J.D. Vance is someone we know well at the embassy. He comes from a state that is the third biggest exporter to Canada in the entire country. We've seen him at many events supporting the Canada-U.S. relationship, and that's a good thing. And he does, as you say, have some strong ties to Canadians, and those are good relationships. So we're really happy to have. Oh, this is a very exciting and excited moment. We're very happy to have someone, on the ticket who understands Canada and the value of the Canada-U.S. relationship. That's a good thing for us, that he has this high level of knowledge.
He has a high level of knowledge, but a little bit like Donald Trump, he's a fierce critic of globalization. He's not exactly a free trader. He's a guy who believes in tariffs, for example, and he's written about this and talked about this, the way some of the trade agreements have hollowed out the economic base of states like Ohio, where he is from. I mean, as someone who's spending a lot of time highlighting the trade relationship, do you have any concerns about the Republicans having a ticket that is not necessarily aligned with, say, the Canadian trade policy?
What works well with us here in talking to Republicans and some Democrats for sure as well is to not question their motive of wanting to bring jobs to America, manufacturing jobs to America, but to point out to them that those jobs depend on having, good customers. And Ohio sells over $20 billion worth of goods every year to Canada, and J.D. Vance knows that well. And so what we often hear, and where we have to make sure that we get to in any conversation with an American that is disinclined towards free trade and disinclined towards globalization, is to say, okay, your policy objectives may be what they are with respect to bringing jobs back to the United States, and we understand that, and that makes sense to us. But if you really want to secure a safe, prosperous, resilient United States, then free trade with Canada is essential. I'm quite sure that someone from the state of Ohio doesn't want to see a tariff war with its biggest customer.
When you look at what's happened in the last 2 weeks in American politics, Ambassador, with the disgruntlement and discontent on the Democratic side about pressuring President Biden to step aside, an assassination attempt, which is something I don't think we expected to see ever again, maybe. Do you have any concerns just about the instability and the volatility that we're seeing in this election campaign right now in our most important trading and political partner?
Yeah, I mean, look, everything that happens in the United States has an impact on Canada. We're neighbors, as you say, and we're so deeply integrated, and that's why we work so hard to make sure that our relationships are strong and that we're able to be resilient in our relationships with the Americans. And at the same time, I don't think there's a country on this planet that wants this country to be safe and stable and secure and have strong, resilient democratic institutions. It's definitely a complicated moment with a lot of turmoil, but it's not the first time. And I think that we're going to have to see how these next months develop. But look, I'll come back to where I started, which is the leadership of both parties, including President Biden and former President Trump, came out and just yesterday and the day before, asking people to be calm, to be unified, and to put country and stability of country first. And so I'm hopeful that citizens will be listening to that message.
With everything that is happening in the United States, so how does this affect the Team Canada agenda? The initiative to reach political leaders at the height of this sort of internal frenzy and the political cycle. I mean, how does it affect your ability just to be heard and to make the case in a time like this?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. So I think we're going to have to check back in maybe at the end of this week. But coming here to Milwaukee, what's been really interesting for me is, so I will be spending some time on the floor here as I am right now with you, but I have so many invitations from people governors and senators that I've met from across the country, Texas, South Carolina, Louisiana, Virginia, to come to their state level meetings where they're going to be discussing policy and priorities for their state. And so those are going to be really interesting meetings to participate in, because I've been invited there precisely because those leaders in those states understand that Canada plays into some of the policies that are central to them. So look, it's always hard to keep and sustain attention in the United States for everyone. I would argue less for us than for some others. But it's a constant discussion, and I think we've made a lot of headway, and I think the fact that I've been invited to come to some of these internal discussions at the state level is testament to that.
Just one last topic to touch on before we let you go, Ambassador. A week ago, there was a lot of attention and focus on Canada's defense spending in the run-up to the NATO summit, which seems a lifetime ago, given everything that's happened in the past week. There was a lot of criticism for Canada. Have you heard any praise for Canada in the aftermath of the 2032 2% target that was announced by the Prime Minister and the entourage in Washington?
Yes, I have. I've heard praise from the State Department and from the White House. The Pentagon has also said to us, I wasn't talking to the secretary there, but some other contacts at the Pentagon, that, we delivered what they asked for, which was a path, a clear date and a path. And more than that, it was a clear date and a path with details as to why we know we're going to get to 2%, because we have certain very specific acquisitions that we need to make for our armed forces. So yes, I've heard positive feedback. Okay, because there's still some skepticism here about a lack of specificity in the way this was done, but you're saying it's not being met with that, at least in the United States, because there was obviously pressure from high levels of government in America to get to this target. You're saying they're satisfied with what's on the table now? Yes, I am.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you for your time. That's Canada's Ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're looking live at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Just this hour, the convention nominated Ohio Senator J.D. Vance to be Donald Trump's running mate.
It is now time for us to determine our nominee for the office of Vice President of the United States, Senator J.D. Vance.
All right, there you can see J.D. Vance. He's been on the floor of the convention with delegates, being cheered by those there in Milwaukee after Trump chose him as his vice presidential pick. So what does this choice mean for the Trump campaign? Here to discuss that, Matt Terrell is the former chief of staff for Marco Rubio's presidential campaign. He's now managing partner at Firehouse Strategies. Matt Terrell, it's good to meet you. Thank you for taking the time today.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I know Marco Rubio's name was one of the names floated around, and I'm sure you would have been happy with that pick, but what do you make of J.D. Vance? What do you make of this choice for the campaign?
Well, look, there's many contenders who are being floated for this VP pick, and look, Senator Vance makes a lot of sense in terms of the selection. Being from Ohio, recognizing that this race will be decided in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That matters. And then furthermore, the generational choice here. And this is someone who is 39 years old. Right now, former President Trump has been making great gains among those young voters, specifically 18 to 34-year-old voters out there. So this election may very well help him bolster his success among that key age group as well. Ultimately, look, this election is to be decided by the voters of this country, and they're going to make a choice between former President Trump and President Joe Biden. That's who they'll be voting for at the top of the ticket. But certainly, this will be a choice that will both resonate with the base, further unite the Republican Party. Not that, frankly, former President Trump needed that. He already had the GOP base firmly in lockstep with him, but a choice that may very well help him in those key battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
It's interesting you point to those Midwest battleground states, right? Because some people had suggested initially that Vance doesn't bring much there because Ohio's already red and you're going to get Ohio. But then I saw Donald Trump Jr. also talking about how good he felt J.D. Vance was in media and on television and on prosecuting the argument and attacking Joe Biden and how important a role that played in it. But you think he can maybe have resonance in those states in addition to helping with the air war?
Well, we'll see. I mean, look, I think when you're making these kind of choices, you recognize that traditionally VP picks don't necessarily make or break an election, but they can help in some areas, and that can be helping to put some states that are already on the map further into play, or just bolster your success in those states. And so, look, this is going to be an election that will likely come down to 100,000 voters. The GOP-based voters, they're going to turn out, in lockstep with former President Trump. The Democrat base, they tend to come home. They'll likely turn out strongly for their Democrat nominee for president. At the end of the day, where does this come down to? Those key Midwest states. If this pick just helps you pick up a point or two in some of those states, that could make or break the election. And then also, look, I go back to the generational selection here as well. This is a 39-year-old individual. That is a point of difference in this race, something that will very much resonate with those 18 to 34-year-old voters that will play a pivotal role in this election as well. Yeah,
I had a moment there where I realized I'm more than a decade older than the Republican nominee for vice president, and I realized how quickly my career is moving past. But Matt, this announcement of this pick, it comes less than 48 hours after what happened in Pennsylvania, this attempted assassination attempt on former President Trump. And since then, there's been these calls for everyone to sort of dial back the rhetoric and lower the temperature. But we saw J.D. Vance kind of tweet something that more or less fingered the Democrats for what happened there on Saturday. What do you make of that messaging in the context of what the GOP leadership is calling for in the aftermath of Pennsylvania?
Well, look, Saturday was really a horrific day for this country, and particularly the fact that an individual at that rally lost their life. So certainly that's something we all need to reflect on. And to that point, this is a moment. It's a moment for particular former President Trump at this convention to not just unite the Republican Party, but unite the country. And right now, both sides can do their part. Leaders on both sides of political aisles need to help to take down the temperature. And then look, I think there's a recognition that none of us are perfect. And Saturday is a reflection point, and all of us as Americans on both sides of the political aisle should look in the mirror and figure out how can we do our part to help take down the temperature, unite the country. And so I think, whether it's with Senator Vance or other elected officials who push things out there, I'll let you ask Senator Vance that question and let them speak for themselves. But the bottom line is no one's perfect. I think you're going to see in this convention, people talk about that. We're all humans, but the moment of unity is now, and it's a moment. This moment will either come and go. And it's important, I think, for former President Trump to capture it, to lean into it. And I think you're going to see this convention, both from former President Trump and Senator Vance, and the other speakers at this convention talk about unity, certainly throughout this week.
It's interesting, though, to hear the repeated calls for unity in the wake of this awful thing that happened on Saturday. But then you overlay it on that analysis you gave earlier, Matt, that 100,000 voters are going to decide this thing because of just the polarization in U.S. politics and the increasing polarization we're seeing here in Canadian politics. I mean, how receptive do you think the American public is to this message of dialing back the rhetoric and calming things down when just politics has just gotten so bruising and personal and divisive, not just in America, but in a lot of countries over the last number of years?
Well, I think it's a moment for our leaders to help drive that. In other words, look, American people will follow what our leaders outline in this election. And if both candidates, both nominees are doing their part to talk about unity, talk about dialing back the rhetoric out there in many cases, that will certainly help. But I do think that this convention, the tone you're going to see going throughout the next couple of days here, I think it's going to be different than what you obviously would have seen before the horrific act that took place on Saturday. On the heels of Saturday, I think what you're going to see here is it not just be about unity, but about strength. Strength when it comes to strengthening our communities, strength when it comes to economic growth, strength when it comes to security, border security. You're going to see the Republican Party in general talk about those things. But at the end of the day, Saturday, as I mentioned earlier, is a reflection point. I think both former President Trump, Senator Vance, they're going to be talking about the importance of all Americans coming together here. We may have our differences, but we need to do it in a civil way.
It's interesting because we saw the Democratic campaign try to get their television ads offline, in the wake of the shooting attempt in Pennsylvania. And I just wonder, how do you think tactically this affects the presidential race going forward? Because negative ads, attack ads, contrast ads, whatever you want to call them, they're such a big part of the modern campaign. But if calling for people to change the tone, pull back the rhetoric, and lower the temperature, how does that affect the tactics you can employ as a campaign between now and the 5th of November?
Well, I think this is a different race. But look, we have a long ways to go between now and November. My hope is that both nominees, both parties will talk about the issues. And so hopefully, I think what you're going to see here is, in particular, former President Trump in this week, really lean into recognizing this moment. And again, this moment will come and go. And it's a moment right now, I think, for former President Trump to demonstrate leadership, which I think many would argue he's already been doing, but also in the past couple of hours here on the heels of Saturday. But also, I think, really lean into the issues and talking about, whether it's tax policy or economic policy, inflation, immigration, the border, crime. There are many issues facing this country, and I think it's going to be important for both nominees and Americans nationwide to have a civil discussion about those. But it goes back to what our leaders do. How do our leaders act on the stage when it comes to talking about these issues and conducting themselves in the campaign? I think what's going to be important to watch here is a speech that former President Trump gives at this convention. Look, I suspect he likely did some rewriting of that speech, if you will, recognizing the important tone to take, going not just throughout this week, but throughout this election and over the next couple of years as well.
Look, I have no idea what having an attempted assassin's bullet rip through your ear does to you as a human being. I can only imagine what former President Trump and his family are going through. But in the political campaigns, Matt, there's teleprompter Trump, and then there's Trump unscripted, and he often is very bombastic. He's belittled his opponents with the nicknames and things in the past. I mean, do you think? How do you think he's going to change going forward? He's talked about it in the aftermath, but so much of what appeals to people is that attacking style of him in his campaigns.
Well, you have to ask former President Trump exactly what he intends to do here, not just throughout this week, but throughout this campaign. But my guess is that this was a moment of reflection. I certainly can't imagine myself what that would be like in terms of what happened on Saturday with that horrific act. And so, look, what my sense is that throughout this week, you're going to see really a discussion about the importance of unity, the importance of the country coming together, the importance of us taking down the temperature. And I think, again, watching what he does in this speech and then watching what the other surrogates and speeches are given throughout the convention, how do those flow as well? And then ultimately on the heels of the convention. And I think you're going to see it really be about the importance of leadership right now. Americans are looking for leadership on both sides of the aisle. We have an important election coming up here. Hopefully we do this. My hope is we do this in a nonviolent and civil way.
Matt Terrell, it was good to meet you. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, that was Matt Terrell. He was the former chief of staff for Marco Rubio's presidential campaign. And we were talking about Donald Trump's running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, just made official at the convention. Well, J.D. Vance has been on Donald Trump's shortlist for vice president for quite some time, and some thought he may not get the nod to join Trump's ticket because of past comments he made about the former president. Comments like the one he made on this very program back in 2016 before he was in politics. Vance spoke to Power and Politics about his book, Hillbilly Elegy. Here's what he said back then when asked if he supported Donald Trump.
He definitely doesn't appeal to me because I think ultimately I see the solution, or I see the problems and I see the hurt that in a lot of these communities. I understand it, and I think I'm very sympathetic towards it. It's the hurt that I talk about in the book and that I grew up around. Unfortunately, I think that Trump is distracting us from the real issues. I don't think that he has good plans to bring jobs back. I don't think he has any solutions to the opioid epidemic that's plaguing these communities. I don't think that he's going to bring hope to a very frustrated and hopeless area. So ultimately, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think he actually speaks to something that's really important, which is that when politicians and when our political elites ignore large swaths of the country, they let other people come in and take their message and take their voters away from them. I think that's the core message of the Donald Trump moment, is that the Republican Party has to do better. And if it doesn't do better, then it's ultimately going to cede its own voters to someone like Trump.